In today's video, we will have a brief glimpse of community detection, which is a very important topic in graph theory and has attracted work from a lot of computer scientists and mathematicians in the past. We will look at communities in networks more from a biological perspective and the concept of modularity. So, next let us understand communities in networks. So, the other name for studying this is known as clustering. What do we understand by a cluster? So, higher intra-connectivity, lesser interconnectivity. So, if I had I might say that there are 3 clusters in this graph. So, we will do a quick detour to understand what clustering is in the first place. Clustering, essentially outside of graph theory. What do we mean by clustering, right? So, there are different ways to cluster. So, this is a classic method in machine learning, in fact in unsupervised learning, wherein we want to discern some patterns in any given data set. So, you are given a particular data set, you want to group similar items together, you want to cluster similar items together. Usually most clustering methods work using a distance matrix, right. You have a matrix of distances and based on that matrix you try to identify which nodes are closer to one another and so on. So, let us take a very simple example. So, let us say you have some x and some y and you have different data points. So, you may end up clustering this in different ways. So, one possible clustering could be, or maybe this becomes a cluster or maybe this becomes a cluster. So, you could have different types of clustering. So, there are a few popular algorithms for clustering. So, there is hierarchical clustering, and k-means clustering and several other methods. Let us not get into that at this moment, but let us look at the example of hierarchical clustering because it is very germane to our current problem. What is hierarchical clustering? You essentially first find out the 2 nodes that are closest. So, given a set of points like this, let us get rid of the cluster. Given these points, which 2 points are closest to one another, right? To me it looks like these 2 points might be very close to each other, right, maybe followed by these 2, these 2, these 2, then maybe these 2, these 2 and so on, right. So, you can get a ranking of which ij's are closest to one another and you then start building what is known as a dendrogram. Something of this sort. So, the leaves of the dendrogram are all your data points, right. So, let us say 1, 7, 3, 2, 9, 4, 5, 8, 6, 11, 10, something like that. Whatever are your points, I have not exactly mapped it to this figure, but what this gives you is you can cut at different levels to get different clusterings. You let us think of this as a some distance axis, right. I cut here, I get one cluster, I cut here, I get 2 clusters, I cut here, I get 11 clusters, right. Every node is every data point is a cluster by itself. Right. So, this is how hierarchical clustering works.
How is the dendrogram built?
The dendrogram is built by using distances, right. You first join the 2 nodes that are closest to each other. So, in this example it looks like 1 and 7 were very close to each other, as were 6 and 11, as were 4 and 5 or 2 and 3. The next closest was perhaps this cluster and 10, right. So, let us just look at this example. How do you compute the distance between these 2 clusters, right? You want to know whether to hook these up in a dendrogram of this sort, right. How would you compute the distance between these 2 clusters? Distance between 2 points, no problem, you can compute the distance, you will compute some Euclidean distance or any Hamming distance, or many different kinds of distances are there, you could pick one of them that makes sense. How do you now compute the distance between 2 sets? So, you can have multiple, you can have minimum distance, you can have maximum distance, you can have average distance,
So, but the average makes
or you could take centroids, right. So, each of this has a different name. So, you have single link algorithm, complete link algorithm, central linkage algorithm and so on. So, each of these have a different name. So, for those of you who have studied bioinformatics before and so on, you may be familiar with this term. This basically means unweighted pair group mean average, which is nothing but this, right. This is used in phylogeny or phylogenetic tree construction. Anyway, so this was the aside. So, what is the main topic that we are looking at? How do we do clustering in networks? Can you think of an idea in the light of what we see on the right hand side? In fact, the classic way to do this is you compute another matrix called W, right, where Wij measures the number of node independent paths. What is a node independent path? So, if you have A, B, C, D, E, F and A, X, Y, Z, F, these are node independent paths. There is no similarity between these 2 paths except the terminus. Right. So, now you will say that these this pair of nodes are connected by 2 paths, is connected by 2 paths. Okay. You use these as weights to create a matrix and then you apply the regular clustering business. Okay. Another very popular algorithm for clustering in networks was given by Girvan and Newman. So, you will see Newman's name appearing a lot of times in this part of the course, because Newman is one of the top network scientists. So, they had an algorithm which actually uses edge betweenness. So, let us see how their algorithm works in a moment. So, how does the Girvan-Newman algorithm work? You first calculate the betweenness for all edges in the network. You then remove the edge with highest betweenness, recalculate betweenness for all the edges that have been affected by the removal, repeat. What will you have at the end? All nodes and no edges, right. But if you rewind the process, if you play the whole process backwards, you will find that nodes get connected pair by pair. You will first add one edge, then you will add another edge. This is the equivalent of hierarchical clustering in some sense. Can you imagine this? Let us see if we can visualize it. This is too symmetric. So, which edge will have the highest betweenness here? This one, perhaps, right. So, remove that first, right. Following this, it may be this one, you remove it. Following this, basically everything has very similar edge betweennesses, so remove everything. There was a note here, right. And then you remove off all of these edges. Right. So, now let us start putting back the edges. We first add these edges, then we add these edges, then we add these edges, and this would correspond to in the hierarchical clustering. So, let us say this is 1, 2, 3, something of this sort, and then these get added, or in fact you can have it very well like this, they are all the same distance, and maybe something else like this here, and then this gets connected to this gets connected to this. Now, you have a hierarchical clustering. You know where to split the communities. If you cut here, you get one single community. If you cut here, you get 4 or 5 communities. If you cut here, you get 3 communities. You have to judge what seems more like a community. How would you test this sort of an algorithm? I give you multiple algorithms for community detection. I said you compute node independent paths and then try to identify what are the communities, or you use the Girvan-Newman community algorithm. How will you judge whether the algorithm is performing well? What would be the test case to study the algorithm and its performance? So, you would start with a sort of community, and make some more communities. All these look like communities, no? Right. And now add edges to these communities. Add edges such that you add more intra community edges and not any fewer you do not even worry, or you already have enough intra community edges, you just throw in a few inter community edges. Now, if you threw this community back at your algorithm, it should fish out these communities again. Right. So, there are 3 communities here. So, in fact, this is how Girvan-Newman tested their algorithm and reported it. They also demonstrated it on certain popular networks. One of them is this interesting story about Zachary's karate club. What happened was, this was a popular karate club where there was some infighting, and finally this club split into 2, but they could actually use the social network of the club and actually predict how the split would have happened. Right. They showed that this split was not surprising once the split happened, because they knew the social connectivity of the members, and then they computed this, they did this community detection and found that this was the most likely split that was going to happen. It was indeed what had happened. Yeah, I think British were very good at this, right. So, the divide and conquer, you know what are all the weak links that join the communities, and you go and first disable these links, then you can easily separate out the communities. So, what is the first edge to remove? What we just saw? The one with highest betweenness. As long as you can find that, you can easily disintegrate the network. In fact, there is also this related concept of bridges. You have the concept of a bridge node or a bridge edge. Bridge edge is that edge which is a bridge between 2 groups, right. So, you remove the bridge node, you in fact end up with bridge edge, you end up with 2 connected components. So, this would be a bridge edge, and in this case this would be a bridge node. There is no bridge node.
Either
You may have both, right. So, here this would be a bridge edge, right, and this would be the bridge node. So, what I have circled is the bridge node, but this is potentially a bridge edge,
or the other.
or this. Even these are all bridges, right, but they are not very important bridges, right. They do not. So, you can look at what bridge gives you the biggest cut, right, the most equal cut. These are in fact very important problems that are studied, for example, in fact in our own chemical engineering, wherein how do I find leaks in a water network and so on, right, or where do I need to make the measurements to predict leaks. So, we have a big network of water distribution, and where do I place sensors appropriately, so that I can make the best measurements to find out where the leaks are and so on and so forth. So, there is in fact a graph theory course out of chemical engineering, right. That is the reason why chemical engineers are very interested in graph theory. Okay. This is a very elegant and effective method, and I have already asked you how you would test this method. So, I did not introduce modularity to you, I directly went into how we calculate modularity and so on. Why is modularity important? It is because many functions in a cell are carried out in a highly modular fashion. And what is a module? It is basically a group of physically or functionally linked nodes that work together to achieve a particular function. And there are many modules in different types of networks, be it a gene regulatory network or a signaling network or a protein interaction network and so on. You could think of pathways in metabolic networks being modules, and it is an important design principle both in engineering and biology. It helps in some sort of decoupling, and it helps insulate different functions. Many kinds of useful outcomes are there for modularity. And there is a very interesting study that was performed by Kashtan and Alon in I think 2003 or maybe the late 90s, where they showed that if you have a gene regulatory network and you subject it to alternating stresses, the network evolves to become more modular, because then it can do nice switching, right. So, if you have a really complex network connectivity and there are multiple stresses, there is so much firing that has to happen to respond to that stress. But if you have nice modules, then in one stress this module can become active, in the other stress the other module can become active. So they found that networks started reorganizing themselves into nicer modules when alternating stresses were provided and so on. So modules essentially show up as highly interconnected groups of nodes. You could think of them as subgraphs where the clustering coefficients of the nodes are very high. In other words, they are cliques or near cliques. So 0.8 is already clique enough. And there are many algorithms to identify clustering in modules or clustering of modules or communities, and we did look at couple of these methods. So in today's lecture we looked at communities in networks and the concept of modularity. In the next video we will study what are motifs, how do you identify motifs, for which you need to identify a null model which is usually obtained by randomization and so on, and what is the biological significance of the existence of motifs, right. What does it mean to have motifs in a biological network?